All right, today we're going to start chapter 2, the ancient Near East people and the empires. We're going to start talking about uh, Judea and the rise uh, of Israel in the early years. Now, as we first part of your chapter, a lot of the reference material of where they're pulling this information is from the Torah or the Old Testament, and it is a lot of times people just view the Bible as a system of beliefs, but it does contain history in it, and there are other records out there that corroborate some of the evidence within the Old Testament. And so it does work as a source for us to learn by. One of the things that we see within the Old Testament is in the book of Exodus. In the book of Exodus, it talks about the flight of the Hebrews out of Egypt under the leadership of Moses. Now, there is some discrepancy of which pharaoh this took place. Several scholars believe that it took place under the reign of Ramses II. Unfortunately, the Egyptians really didn't write, yeah, we got beat by Moses, and God brought all these plagues down upon us, and yeah, so we let the Jews leave and head over to Israel. We don't have that from the other side, but what we do find within Exodus is the Hebrews leaving Egypt, going back. They'll spend a number of years out in Sinai, kind of wandering the desert. I believe the Bible says they wandered there for 40 years before they were finally able to be let in to their promised land and into Canaan and establish um, their new society there. Now I've got King Solomon and I got King David. I'm gonna talk about King David first because King David comes before King Solomon. King David's reign was roughly 1000 BC to 970 BC is when we see um, uh, the reign of King David. From some of the things that we see in the reign of King David is that he is the one that is going to really start to pull the different groups together. He really, so no under King David, he established Hebrew control over Palestine. And when I say Palestine, we're talking about that area uh, uh, west of the Dead Sea, almost down to Sinai, up to modern day Lebanon within that area. Roughly the same territory that modern day Israel encompasses. That's what we call as Palestine. Uh, Go ahead. All right, Andrew had a question about some of the places. So if we look on page 36, map 2-1, it says Palestine in the first millennium. If you see, Palestine is that area between the Mediterranean and the Dead Sea. From that area, what we see is Syria down to Sinai. Sinai is that peninsula area between Egypt and um, the western part of Asia there. Do you see that, Andrew? Yes, that is that's Philistines. That's a part of Palestine. Palestine is really that entire area that is shaded. Now you're going to see different kingdoms are going to control different areas at different times. colored area all of that refers to Palestine. Yes. Now, uh, now it roughly still kind of um, resembles modern day Israel. Now, modern day Israel doesn't come to an existence until 1949 when the British relinquished control over that and established the modern state of Israel. What we are Is this going to be on YouTube? Yes. Yeah. All right. Well, I'm sorry it's crap for you, Andrew, but stop. That sounds better. All right. Okay. So Palestine, looking at that map, 2-1 map, that is the area that's going to encompass what we refer to Palestine. When we talk about the kingdom of Judea or kingdom of Israel, it's all referred to, we encompass that as Palestine. And those of you that have a Christian background, and you have within the Old Testament, these are the areas that they're talking about. It was a kingdom. Now, whether or not you hold whatever beliefs they have, that's totally different because part of the Old Testament is actually a record of things happening. Sometimes you have to step back and when they say God did this or God did that, according to your beliefs, you either accept it or you don't accept it. But there are things that take place. Does that make sense? What we're trying to get at here? David was a real king for Palestine. David will control this area. You probably know King David more by what he did as a young boy, by a killing Goliath there, the old slingshot story that's in the Old Testament. That's what that's what brings King David really to prominence. Now, a lot of times, some scholars say that a lot of these early biblical stories were written years after the fact, so they question the validity of some of the stories. Now, obviously, if you're a Christian, you take everything within the Bible as truth and you don't question that. Now, King David actually will eventually, or when he comes to power, he actually replaces Saul. King David is one that within his reigns, he is looked down as being favored by God. Now, even when you read some of the biblical stories of King David had all the same faults as any other humans. Does anybody know any of uh, King David's faults? Well, he was kind of seen as just. There's times he does do some things. Has anybody heard of Bathsheba? And heard of the story about Bathsheba? Hadn't heard of the story. Bathsheba was, this kind of shows some of the faults, even though King David was chosen by God to rule. Bathsheba was a very beautiful woman. Bad thing about it is that she was already married. King David seduces her, eventually gets her pregnant, and Bathsheba's husband, he calls him back from the front, to kind of cover up the affair, encourages her husband and her to um, uh, procreate. Her husband refuses, says, "Hey, he doesn't want to, have sexual relationships until after they've won this battle that they've been waging." And King David, knowing that sooner or later the secret's going to come out, eventually has Bathsheba's husband sent to the front lines so that he will die in battle, so that he can then, take Bathsheba as his wife. It later comes out that that they've done stuff beforehand, but it also shows that some of the faults within David. That although that David's just like any other human being. Now, go ahead. Say that again. I don't recall. I'd have to read the book just a little bit closer to let you know on that. I think it's in there. Okay. Now, okay, after we have, what happened there? Hello. We got somebody else. All right. After King David, King Solomon comes to power. King Solomon rules from 970 to 930 BC, and some of 40 years. Well, back then that's a pretty long reign, 40 years. You got to realize that our presidents only serve a maximum of 8 years. They're not kings. Well, even still, David ruled for what 30 years, so he's well, still a long time, I think. Okay. Some of the things that King Solomon are noted for is he will be instrumental in building the temple in Jerusalem, and their temple is going to be um, one of those aspects that we're going to see is going to house a variety of different things. It was the temple was constructed. It was the symbolic center of the Hebrew religion. We see it's also that center of their society. It housed sacred relics such as the Ark of the Covenant. Uh, okay, once again, Solomon, this is real. Uh, he had he had constructed the temple there in Jerusalem, center of Hebrew religion. It did house the Ark of the Covenant, but later on, when the temple is destroyed, the Ark disappears from record. Other things that we see King Solomon do is that he helped foster trade. He helped foster trade, made it more of a prosperous society. Uh, Also, within the Old Testament, we see several stories about King Solomon, about his wisdom. Probably one of the best known stories about King Solomon is where two women are claiming the same baby as their own. Does anybody know the story? Yes, Bailey. Yes, Bailey. What's the story? To him that they he couldn't determine who the mother was, so he said, "We'll cut it in half, and each will get a half." The real mother said, "I'll give it up," and the other one said, "We can still divide it." And King Solomon says, "Well, the one that would give it up is the real mother." What's that? Can we quit? That is the very first story in the chapter. It's it's in there. Okay, when it talked about Jerusalem in 586 BC, this is referring to when Jerusalem will be destroyed by the Babylonian, uh, the, and they were the next word there, cauldrons or Chaldeans. They were the um, uh, leaders, or that was the group of Babylonians that are there in coming and controlling over um, over the Jews. Okay, now a lot of them a lot of historians that look at the destruction of Jerusalem in 586 because there is reference to it in the Old Testament. There's also reference in the Babylonian records of the destruction of Jerusalem. Now, obviously, it paints two different pictures of what's going on because the Babylonians are presenting it as a great victory. Uh, the Hebrews are presenting it as a way that they have been, God is punishing them. But and some historians will look at it and say that a lot of the writings in the Old Testament actually come after the Babylonian captivity, because at this time, Babylon was the center of culture at that time. The things that they had within Babylon were far outreached anything that you would have found in the Jewish kingdoms, and some actually believe that some of their religious aspects come from after going there, because even within the captivity or part of um, uh, Old Testament teaching shows that Jews are descendants from a person called Abraham. Abraham is a common ancestor that a lot of Arabic people say that Abraham can be traced to Mohammed. And so there is that connection. But eventually the Jewish captivity ends in 538 BC when they were allowed to come back um, to Palestine, and they will start rebuilding their society at that time. 538. Now, the destruction of Jerusalem takes place under the rule of the Chaldean ruler of Nebuchadnezzar II. Once again, it is spelled Nebuchadnezzar. N E Yes, Nebuchadnezzar. What's that? Yeah, he was the Chaldean ruler that during this Babylonian captivity. Now, a lot of Hebrew or Jewish teaching is based around, and their life system is really based around their religion. So, and some say that this concept of a monotheistic uh, God, a one uh, a one God, overall God, really comes from some of the things that eventually worked its way back from the Babylonian captivity. And some of the things to know about their concept of God was that God was a creator of the world, but he was not a part of nature. Where a lot of rulers saw, or excuse me, a lot of cultures saw uh, different gods within aspects of nature. They saw that God was the creator of nature, but he was not inherently a part of it. Uh, they also viewed all people as being subject to God, regardless of whether or not they believed in him or not. They they really had that monotheistic view, and that everybody was underneath them. The other thing that we see coming from that Hebrew uh, conception of God was really uh, uh, God handing out punishment. If you did not do God's will, you got punished. So things that happened in your life was a punishment from God. Now, God's the name that the Hebrews referred to God was Yahweh. Yahweh means God, and they saw God as being omnipotent. And when I say omnipotent, what do I mean? All powerful, a little bit more than all powerful. All knowing. Omnipotent means all knowing. So if you are omnipotent, you know everything. What's that? Say that again. It's Latin for all knowing. I don't know Latin, so I'll take your word for it. Okay. Okay. Also within um, Hebrew religion, and it talks about it in the Old Testament, is that God had made a covenant or this sacred pact between the Hebrews and God, so that there is a, a holy agreement that if the Hebrews follow God's teaching, He is going to look after them. Okay? That's why when you look at modern day things going on in the Middle East, uh, a lot of Christian groups are concerned with the existence of Israel because the Old Testament says that the Hebrews or the Israelites are the chosen people of God, and if they're chosen people of God, uh, you can kind of figure out if other things, beliefs are going to happen, and does not want Israel to be destroyed by any outside power. We also see. Go ahead. Getting close. Um, we also see that within the Hebrew religion, it deals with the Ten Commandments. Okay, Ten Commandments. Those were that covenant that was given to Moses on Mount Sinai, on the Hebrews' exodus out of Egypt. Now, go ahead. I didn't hear you guys. Okay. Yeah, I know. So you didn't have to write on your own paper. I understand. It's okay. You can use your own paper there, Patrick. Yeah. All right. Also, remember, like I said, within the Ten Commandments that's found in the Old Testament, it really refers to the Hebrews as that chosen people, that they are God's people. So that, once again, that's why it's very important for them to, uh, or that Christians view Israel as a state and continuing as a state is very important to them because obviously Christians believe in Christ. Christ was a Jew, a Hebrew, and so they see that as the final uh, realization of God's promise. Hey, you getting tired? I know. I'm hot. All right. Let's talk about Hebrew prophets. Okay. One way that God spoke to his people were through prophets. And they were considered that voice of God, that things that they say later on become an aspect of truth, things to happen. Some will say that some of the Bible, or some experts say that the aspects of the Bible were written after the fact, and so it's kind of like going back and once you have all the information, write it down. Now, one aspect where later on when we see Christ as being a um, connected, that he is the prophet or the Messiah, because in the Old Testament it talks about the coming of a Messiah to save God's people. Uh, and some of the clues that they point out is that this Messiah will be a direct descendant of the of King David. And so King David, and if you read Matthew and Luke, there are reference that Christ, his lineage, can actually be traced back to King David, so making him the correct um, correct lineage or the actual Messiah there. All right. Our bell's about ready to ring here, so we're going to stop here for the day. I will try, but you guys were being kind of very disrespectful today.